Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada. My obeisance is unto all the Vaishnavas and friends who will be listening to this, what I think is going to be very, very interesting discussion. This is part of the global effort, week events of celebrations on books are the basis to help us focus even more deeply on Srila Prabhupada's books, Srila Prabhupada's contributions through his written and spoken word, and how we can take advantage of that. And we're very happy you're all tuning in to hear a little more about what some of our exalted guests here today have to share. My name is Anutama Das. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm a member of the governing body commission, the Джи-би-си, and also serve as the Minister of Communications. And I'm very happy to present three very, very special devotees, God brothers of mine, people, all three of whom I've personally been inspired by in my life in many, many ways. And I'm very, very grateful to have their association now and in the past, and hopefully for many years in the future. They are three people with very, very different backgrounds, and I think they're going to offer some unique contributions to this discussions today. So let me begin by introducing His Holiness Bhakti Marg Swami, who is seated next to a beautiful bust of Srila Prabhupada. We were talking earlier about the history of that rendition of Prabhupada there. Bhakti Marg Swami is the Джи-би-си representative of Canada. For those of you that follow current events, North America has recently been realigned a little bit, so he now also has some responsibilities in some of the north central states in the United States. He's also a very well-known, in fact, if you call his phone number, he'll answer it by introducing himself as the walking monk. So Maharaj is the walking monk amongst perhaps all the monks of the world, definitely among ISKCON. He's walked across Canada 3 times, and I don't know how many other countries. 4 times now, 4 times, amazing. United States, I know once, and many other countries as well, spreading the mission and the word of Krishna consciousness around the world. And he also, we're going to explore this a little bit later, he's very well known as a dramatist, someone who writes plays, directs plays, particularly with young devotees. I know he goes to Mayapur when those festivals are going on and inspires a lot of young people to participate. So we're going to find out a little bit later about what's the role of Prabhupada's books and Maharaj's theatrical performances. Second, in no particular order, I want to introduce Vaisheshika Prabhu, who is, as far as the discussion of Vaisheshika Prabhu, I just have to mention when I was a new Bhakta, I joined the temple in Denver, Colorado, and early on was given the opportunity, I should say, really, to distribute books, Srila Prabhupada's books in the Denver airport. And Vaisheshika Prabhu was just a person that gave me so much faith in the positive impact of Prabhupada's books, because just by his presence, by his blissful presence and his enthusiasm, he would just really had a way of touching people's hearts. Over the last 10 or maybe 15 years or so, particularly those of us in North America are very well. He's really helped revitalize book distribution in North America, particularly focusing on getting congregational members involved and organizing large Sankirtan festivals and so many things. And of course, this week, we're also noting the celebration of Bhadra Purnima. This whole season is going on. So Vaish and his team have been the ones behind that. And really very honored to have him here to talk about books of the basis and Srila Prabhupada's books and what they mean to all of us. And the third member of our wonderful team here, Kalakanta Prabhu, who has been the temple president in North America in many, many different communities, is a longstanding leader in North America. And he's also well known as an author. He's written several books, renditions of the Bhagavatam and the Gita into kind of vernacular English and simplified forms that he can speak about a little bit later. He's also a musician. If we get a chance, we're going to ask him about how Prabhupada's books have inspired some of his musical performances. And again, in North America, he's particularly well known for the work that he's done. Again, I think over the last decade or more, he's been in Gainesville, Florida, which is the home of the University of Florida. And he's established and developed the Krishna House there, which is a wonderful program for attracting young people in the university and far beyond that to have the association of other young people and go deep in their own Krishna consciousness. So these are 3 very, very special people here to talk about a very, very special topic. So thank you all for joining us today. It's really wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Nutama Prabhu. Good to be here.
Yes, same for me.
Thank you, Prabhu.
So thanks for taking time out because you're all busy. So I wanted to just kind of jump into the topic, books of the basis, and particularly I'm inspired because you just 3 very I don't want to exaggerate you, but you are wonderful people. In my mind, you're wonderful people, and you're also very diverse. And sometimes I remember in Denver years ago, there was a friend of the temple who kind of was getting to know devotees a little bit more. And at one point in time, she kind of mentioned about how busy she was in her job. And she said, I'm not like you people. I don't just sit around and pray all day long. And you three are vibrant examples of how Hare Krishna devotees don't just sit around and pray all day long. We pray, and then we work hard in a prayerful mood all day long. I think that's more appropriate what we do. But you have very, very, very varied expressions of your Krishna consciousness. So in the context of book distribution and the Prabhupada's books being the basis of all they do, I want to ask that question. How is it individually in your lives, looking individually in your creative expression, your experience of Krishna consciousness, how is it the books are the basis? How is that played out in your life? And let's start perhaps with Vaisheshika Prabhu on this one.
I got introduced to Krishna consciousness through books. I hadn't ever met devotees, but I got a Back to Godhead magazine in which I saw an advertisement for more of Prabhupada's books, including the Sri Upanishad, which said that God was a person. So I wanted to look into that as soon as possible. I went to Shambhala Books on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, California. I asked for every title that was there by Bhakti-Vedanta Swami. I read them multiple times, and then I joined the temple. And when I joined the temple, I thought that the guru would be there and I would just surrender and become a disciple. And they told me, he's not here, he's in India. And, he comes here infrequently, but he's in his books. And that resonated with me, and it always has. And the first time I met Prabhupada in San Francisco, and I was introduced along with several others as among a team that distributes books. Prabhupada looked at all of us and said, you must also read my books. They're not just for selling. That left an impression on me because we had a strong work ethic, especially in the early days, for staying out all day long and selling books. And I took that to heart. So that was the introduction I had to Krishna consciousness, and that's always stuck with me. Prabhupada's words about it and my own experience about how he's really present in his books, and the vibration of the spiritual world is fully available through his books.
So, Vice, maybe I'll go to the other two devotees here. Take that little, because you kind of gave a slice of how you became introduced to Prabhupada's books. Maybe I want to come back and ask you how it's played out over the years. But let's go to, let's say, Bhakti Marg Swami next. Maybe your introduction to Prabhupada's books being the basis of our Krishna consciousness.
Well, thank you. And like Vaisheshika Prabhu was saying, my introduction was through a Back to Godhead magazine. And I read the content. I was really impressed. And I was, in those days, following the Christian stream. And I was born as a Catholic. I was quite devout, and I'd go to Mass every day before I went to school. And I did that just out of my own volition. No one told me to go. I liked being in church. There weren't too many people. I liked Jesus. He was such a cool dude. And it set the tone for me for the rest of the day. So I read the Back to God magazine, and that led to, meeting devotees on the street. And where I was going to college, I was taking a fine arts course, and, sculpture and painting and all those kind of things. And I met the devotees. I invited them to my place just to see another angle, another version of spirituality. And they just really impressed me. And I thought, hey, these guys are quite Christian-like. And maybe there's a message that resonates for everyone, that speaks of transcendence. And we don't have to have these big institutional walls to divide us so much. So I also felt that the devotees were the ones that were following what they were talking about and what was in the books. And I remember that first morning, a devotee by the name of Vishwakarma, he was giving a class on the Bhagavatam, and everything that he said was so right on from what I embraced as spirituality. And then somebody by the name of Ayogyapati, now known as V.V. Govindaswamy, read to me from the Krishna book, and I thought it was so colorful, so artistic, I couldn't believe that this was the real world. I thought it was very surreal. Krishna playing on the flute and attracting these young women, the gopis. It's like, oh, this is so extraordinary, you know. I thought it was very poetical, and I told him, this is very poetical. Whoever came up with these words that dreamed this up, they got quite the imagination. And so anyway, I got to reading the Nectar of Devotion. One thing led to another, started to chant. And so the books have led me and brought me to the place where I am now, in a temple. And I walked into the door, and I never really left. So here I am, Swami of some sort.
We're going to explore more in a minute how that's continued on. So far as I understand it, Bhakti Mark Swami, your story is Jesus led you to the Bhakti-Gita, which led you to the poeticness of Prabhupada's books. And Vice Prabhu, somehow a devotee led him to the Shambhala bookstore, and that led to a full set of whatever was available of Prabhupada's books. And from those points, so much has come forward. Kalakanta, did Muhammad bring you to Prabhupada's books? What's your story? Which was your? We got Shambhala, we got Jesus. How were you led here?
Hey, don't forget George Harrison.
George Harrison, yes.
Well, first, I have to apologize for broadcasting from the impersonal Brahman here. I'm traveling in Airbnb. This is the only background I have. I feel very impersonal with these beautiful backgrounds before me. But if my journey with Prabhupada's books began when I was 16 and was reading impersonal books, various authors that gave me a vague sense of spirituality that was very frustrating. So finally, when I was 18, I decided I'm just leaving. I'm going to go find God. That's my goal in life. And a few months later, I met the Hare Krishna Kirtan Party in Portland, Oregon, led by Dinabandhu Prabhu. And he sold me a Sri Ishopanishad, which I read and then came to the temple. And they had a very tough vetting program in those days. I said, "Could I move in?" He said, "Okay." That was it. And the temple there in Portland, just a small temple, but it was all structured around Prabhupada's books. We would study Bhagavatam in the morning, then Ishopanishad after that, the Nectar Devotion, Bhagavad-Gita, and in between go out for Harinam and book distribution. And that was my life for those very formative years. Finally, in these books, I was finding the techniques of spiritual life that had eluded me in my previous readings. So tangible, so specific, and so consistent. So that was how Prabhupada's books have become the basis of my spiritual life.
I'm just reflecting. It's real quick. Then I want to go back to Vaish. I remember I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, also kind of looking for some spiritual direction and going to this retreat, that retreat, Zen centers. I went to hear some yogi speak, and he spoke for about 45 minutes. Know yourself, know yourself, know yourself. And I kept thinking he's building up to the grand finale. At the end, he's going to tell us who myself is, who the self is. And then the curtain came down. That was it. So Kalakanta, when you talk about Prabhupada being tangible, consistent, practical, I think that those are really three beautiful words that helped make that connection for all of us. Vaish, let's go back. You gave us the history. Tell us a little more in your life. You know, you've been distributing books since you were 16, I think, or so, and never stopped. And it's just expanding. How is this books are the basis? How's it played out after that initial introduction to Krishna consciousness and the temple there? How's it played out a little more through your life, particularly today? How's it impacting what you do?
Ever since I started reading Prabhupada's books, it feels natural to read them every day. It's the culture that was inculcated in me when I joined the temple, which was fine with me because that was already my tendency. I felt at home with Prabhupada's books. And in our community here at ISKCON of Silicon Valley, I found that although people can't come every single day because we have a householder community, if they have sufficient contact with Prabhupada's books and a few other practices, which are listed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be among the 65 out of the 64 that are especially potent, then one can do quite well in spiritual life. I would say that the vibration of Prabhupada's books are the primal sound or the primary sound of ISKCON. That's the genesis of everything for us. And organizing, for instance, times when people can come together and hear for sufficient amounts of time is very helpful, especially with the youth. We have Youth Jam that's evolved over the years because we have lots of kids here who apparently grow up after some time. And from the time that they're very young, coming together, yes, a lot of youth like kirtan, but they also like to hear from Prabhupada's books if that's what's inculcated. And so we started getting together after the Sunday program. That is myself and a bunch of kids. No other adults allowed, so there was not much encumbrance, the parents looking over the shoulders. And then we'd do some kirtan and then a lot of shlokas from the books, and then reading from those shlokas, what do they mean, and then cross-referencing. And when the youth, starting at 5 years old and upwards, get used to that culture, it becomes part of their lives. They think like that. They become Shastra Sunipuna. They start to know how all of these books, the Bhagavatam and the Vedanta Sutra and the Bhagavad-Gita, where they came from, how they all hang together, and they can quote from them. So that emanates outwardly into the community. Of course, we do that with the adults also, but this is an anecdote from a day in the life of that is very helpful. It's just taking the time to sit and read with the youth.
So that's something where, as a community leader, you've seen this underlying principle of the primary sound, as you described in Prabhupada's books, how to have that manifest in the community today is something that's carried forward from your experience of Prabhupada's books and the potency that's there.
Correct. And it's the genesis of book distribution, because if you don't know what's in the books, why would you be interested in distribute them? In other words, if I'm not getting some experience that this is helping me by hearing from these books, from reading them, why would I go offer them to somebody else with enthusiasm? But I do find that sometimes people go out to distribute the books having not read them very much, and then they get curious, like, what's in them anyway? Because people seem to want to buy them.
It reminds me again, just a quick story. I remember again in the Denver airport some years ago, some pilot stopped and asked one of the devotees, challenged him like that. You don't even know what's in these books. And he said, well, why don't you try me? And he gave him a Bhagavad-Gita, and he flipped it open. He said, okay, whatever, 7:18. And he recited the verse, flip another, 17, 7, whatever, 12th chapter, 4th verse, just at random. And the devotee, like 4 or 5 in a row, he knew the verses. And the pilot was impressed. I don't remember if he took a book, but I'm sure he changed his opinion, seeing that how well substantiated the devotee's faith was in books. Let's go to Kalakanta this time. But tell us how, again, this theme, books are the basis. How has that impacted the programs that you've created in Krishna House and maybe your own expression of Krishna consciousness in recent years?
Yes, the Krishna House phenomenon has seen people of diverse backgrounds coming to Bhakti and studying Prabhupada's books at a young age. Again, this has been very gratifying for us to experience the way that we did back in the 60s and 70s here in North America. So for these newcomers, the first crucial step that determines how far they'll go in Krishna consciousness is how they build their relationship with Srila Prabhupada. We encourage them, when you're reading in Prabhupada's books about a guru, just think of Prabhupada as your guru while you're starting. And then later, you can take official initiation from someone to help you enrich that relationship. But it all begins by reading Prabhupada's books. So we have the standard classes in the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad-Gita. We do a whole curriculum for Bhakti-Shastrы, so they get nectar of devotion, each Upanishad, and in a rotating order. And that's the cornerstone for their studies in the ashram. Then, on top of that, we begin to encourage them to form study groups, or at least read amongst themselves in teams, if possible. Chanakya Pandit says that travel is best done in groups of 3, eating alone and reading in groups of 2. It's like a study buddy system. But I do want to say, as in this experience of having hundreds of young people getting introduced to Prabhupada's books, we find that many people have study propensities, but others don't. Some people just are not particularly good readers. So what is their relationship with Prabhupada's books? So I heard a beautiful story I'd like to share about that. 2, actually, if you'll allow me. There was a sadhu who was giving lectures, Bhagavad-Gita, and afterwards, the lady approached him and said, "I love hearing from you, but I just don't retain anything. Can you give me any advice?" And he said, "Yes. Tomorrow, bring me a basket full of Ganges water, and I will explain to you." She said, "A basket of Ganges? Yeah, just bring me a basket full of Ganges water. No question. Just bring me a basket." So she came the next day with a wet basket, said, "Maharaj, I tried and tried and tried. I couldn't get any water to stay." And he said, "Yes, but now your basket is clean." So the point is, whether we retain or not, we teach the devotees, just hear, and you'll be purified. The effect will take place. One more brief story in this regard, that for those who are not very studious, you might find this inspiring. Some years ago, I had the fortune to be with Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Sridhar Maharaj on Jayananda Prabhu's disappearance day. So they were telling stories, and Sridhar Maharaj said, "One day, I sat down with Jayananda Prabhu to say our noon Gayatri, and after 30 seconds, he popped up. And so when I finished, I said, 'Prabhu, that was the fastest Gayatri I've ever seen.' And he said, 'Yes, I can't remember a word of it.' And so then Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, 'Well, I was there when Prabhupada was explaining to Jayananda, teaching him the Gayatri mantra.' So he would go over one line and ask Jayananda to repeat it. And he went back and forth for half an hour. And finally he smiled and said, 'It is hopeless. But because you are sincere, whatever you say, Krishna will accept it.'"
Beautiful.
So we take the students as they are, and those who are scholarly, we encourage them. Those who are not so scholarly, we encourage them. Just keep hearing and associating with Prabhupada through his books.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. Maharaj, share some thoughts with us. And I'm still going to go back because I want to go back with Kalakanta and ask a little bit more in a minute about how the books have inspired him with his songwriting, his writing, his personal writings and things like that. But so far, they're kind of talking about how it's impacted their work with the community, which is beautiful. But I also want to go back to their personal stories. I'm going to come back to you both in a minute. So Maharaj, some thoughts from your side. You've been there in Canada for a long time. I failed to mention in the beginning, I don't think I mentioned, all 3 of these illustrious guests are direct disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and all 3 of them are initiating gurus in ISKCON. So they've taken that responsibility of accepting disciples themselves. So again, very special devotees who are blessed to be with here today. So Maharaj, please.
Well, I would like to say that the Gita is prefaced by Srila Prabhupada saying, an American woman came to me and asked me about why is there a need for another Bhagavad-Gita when there are so many, on display, sold, over the years. At that time, there were probably about 600 versions in various languages from India, as well as English. And Prabhupada said he felt there was a need for it because although there are different renditions of it, there was a failure on the part of many of the authors to not present the spirit of the Gita. And the spirit of the Gita is to not like the background of Kalakanta, sort of nebulous and void and so like that, but very, very definitive and very precise and things like that. And that's what really moved me. And that's what I loved about Prabhupada, a consistency throughout, and expressing who is God and everything right down to the point where he lives, his actual address, and probably his email address as well. If you want to get real deep and you'll find that there too. So for me, just being in the Bhagavatam class, apart from like in the morning program, is very cherishable for me, even though I suffer from insomnia. I have a hard time sometimes in the morning, but there's Mangalarti and there's Tulsi Puja, and you get a chance to dance like crazy. And then there's the Bhagavatam class, and everyone gets to sit down and tap their brain a little bit, and not just the brain, but the heart, the two most very important muscles. There's nothing like it to set the tone for the day. And so we make a point of it that it has to go on. And, at the temple here, various temples that are in charge of, we try as best as we can to have evening program studies, Gita as well. And what's really nice about during the time of COVID, the pandemic, I'm not a very technically savvy kind of person, but we've gone a little bit wild on, Gita discussions. I just love taking one verse from the Bhagavad-Gita and rattling on and encouraging discussion with groups and, in different parts of the world, like I'm sure some of our other devotees on the panel are doing as well. And it really makes your day because you're looking at different time zones. Oh, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to do a class now, or sometimes at 10:30 at night. But it really punctuates the day in a very spiritual, powerful manner. And so that's one thing I would say that's in favor of the current times, with the Bhagavad Gita. And I guess people, it's a little more interactive in this manner. And you get a chance to read. And I prefer to go through every verse, read out the Sanskrit and then the translation, and then go meticulously through the purport by Srila Prabhupada. And naturally, people have questions in regards to some of the statements that are made that might be, let's say, controversial by nature. So now you get a chance to give a purport to the purport. You try to explain best you can in the current context what this might mean and how it fits into today's world. So that's how the books have impacted me. I must admit, I don't spend a lot of time during the day reading, but when I do sit down, I really take that Bhagavatam class seriously. And to complement that, we always read something about Prabhupada, about the author, like memories. And we get together with the boys here in the ashram, and we read the memories. So it's not that you just read the philosophy, but you also have the living example, the Bhagavat person who's breathing it and living through it. So we find it a nice complementary kind of program that way.
Raj, I want to, before I let you off and go to another question here, tell us all a little bit about, you are so well known for the dramas that you do, and they're always based on Prabhupada's teachings, on Mahabharata and different. How does that interact with you? How have Prabhupada's books played a role as the basis, and have they played a role as a basis in your wonderful dramatic presentations?
Well, very much. I was always interested in, I came from a farm in the country. There was no theater around. But I was always interested in movies, Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda and all the old Betty Davis and all those superstars that were just.
For those that don't know, those are some famous people from the 18th century for the younger people. Yes.
Yeah, I was so intrigued with them. Not always the content, but how they would play. A good argument was always something that was very intriguing for me. So, and life is full of drama, conflict, good and bad, and the struggle that people go through, even when it comes to the spiritual journey. So I just thought this is a good basis. Like Prabhupada's giving us the storyline for great material that you could put on the stage. So you go from the page to the stage, and just like say, to give an example from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's an outline of the story of Shakshi Gopal, the deity that walked, and involved the two Brahmins, one old, one young. And so let's say the skeleton is there, the framework is there, but no real super details are given. So you have the fun, the joy of we're working within the context of the culture of the time, and now having been in India, seeing how people interact with each other, to incorporate those kind of things in the story. You also have to give them names, because it just says in the purport in Chitin Chartamrita, old Brahman, young Brahman. Okay, but what are their names? So you have to give them names, And then you have to. There was definitely a major opposition from the old Brahmin side to have their girl, the daughter of the old Brahmin, being married to the younger Brahmin, who was quite illiterate and didn't come from a super well background family. And so you have to come up with an argument, a kind of a realistic, back and forth dialogue that makes it fun and relevant. And yeah, I can relate to that. That's a real good story. So it's fun.
The books really have been the foundation or the basis.
Yes.
Of all these beautiful dramatic presentations that you've done. I like that, what you said, from the page to the stage. That's a beautiful concept.
Yes, and let's not forget that Prabhupada once said in New York, after he saw a drama of Rukmini being kidnapped by Krishna, he said, the play is better than the book. So, but the foundation for the dramas are the books, and it is the skeleton, it's the bones, and you put some flesh on it, and then it becomes like full and complete. And it was something Prabhupada wanted us to do. He loved the dramas, So without these books, you don't have anything, Yeah. And I'm so grateful to our God brothers, like Krishna Dharma, for instance. He's one of our devotees in ISKCON, who's a great author, and Mahabharata and the Ramayana. He writes so well; it flows so beautifully. So it especially like accelerates interest in me. Okay, I get very inspired by those kind of writings, and I'll pull stuff out of there to throw into the work, into the script. And it's always important for me to bring out elements of how important relationships are, not just between me and God, but also between me and or like in the case of a spouse, or with your brothers, family members, friends. And we always try to bring those elements out, that it's not just purely religious overtoned.
Yeah, and certainly those are very powerful themes throughout the Bhagavatam, throughout the Chaitanya Charita. See the relationships between devotees and their struggle to become devotees, and their struggle with family members. I'm thinking of Vidura struggling with his elder brother to become a little more, give up the and all of that. Yeah, lots of that is there. Vice, let's go back to you. Certainly, looking at how Prabhupada's books are the basis. Tell us how, with you, it's just an obvious connection, but I want to hear a little bit more from you. How that experience of how Prabhupada's books changed your life, how it so much motivated you to really make this the core of what you've given your life to in the last so many years. And it's not just you going out and distributing books, but really you inspiring other people to distribute Prabhupada's books. So help us understand that inspirational bit, because I think what we're looking at in part here is how Prabhupada's books can be the base of everything that we do in life when we Krishnaize it a little bit. So tell us how it's working wonderfully for you.
It helps me to conceive of fulfilling Prabhupada's instruction to read his books. It's easy enough to look at all of them together and feel overwhelmed and think, how could I possibly read all these books? In fact, if you look at the thinness of a page, you might say, well, it's impossible because, how could you ever get anywhere? It's almost like Zeno's law says you can't get anywhere anyway because you have to go infinite number of halfway points. And so if I look at one page, I might get discouraged. And at one point, I started thinking, how can I read all these books regularly? And I heard a talk by an organizer, a motivational speaker, and he said any task that you divide up into smaller parts can be done very easily if you just do it consistently. And that made a light go off in my head. And I then realized that there are a finite number of pages in Prabhupada's books. Mm-hmm. So I worked together with another devotee and counted all the pages in every one of the books. and listed them. Then we divided it into time periods. For instance, how many pages would I have to read per day if I were to finish all of Prabhupada's books in a year, or let's say Bhagavatam? And it turns out there's a number. You can say what it is. And here I'm going to say it. It's 41 pages.
Please.
41 pages a day. 41 pages a day. You'll finish the whole Bhagavatam with a day to spare. And all the other books, you can apply the same principle. So I made a little chart, and I found out it was very popular. It was just on a card. I used to give them out after classes. In fact, I once got mobbed in Vrindavan. I said, I have a little chart, a little gift for you. And the Vyasa-san was being pushed across the courtyard. And then we made it into an app. So it's available on iOS and also for Android. And it's called Be a Sage, page by page. And if you go on there, you can dial up any of Prabhupada's books and then say, I want to finish this in, say, a month. How many pages do I have to read a day? And then get a reminder. So I like to do that because it keeps me, it becomes part of my daily sadhana to do that. And then I just mark it. I make sure I mark it down, and I put a little, if I'm reading from a paper book, I put a little sticker, the kind of flags that you can buy from the stationery store, and I write on it with a marker 41, and then I just move it 41 pages forward, stick it in, and say when I reach the marker, I've done my rounds for the day. In the book, Sankhya Purvaka. If I don't count it, then the mind will trick me and say, "Oh, you read these when you were young. You don't need to read them anymore." So I take it as a daily discipline from my own practice, and I've introduced that to plenty of other devotees who have found that there's a great power to reading Prabhupada's books every day. It seems to, as a manager, I realized early on that it wasn't me; it was the way of the world, that I'm constantly dealing with problems and issues, and most of them intractable. And therefore, I need refuge somewhere, and I find refuge in Prabhupada's purports, and obviously the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad-Gita, to be able to go to higher ground in my mind and be able to deal with all the problems that come up by developing a higher context through reading Prabhupada's books every day.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm taking some notes here. In a few more minutes, we'll come back and add maybe to what the three of you mentioned about some tips about inspiration, and also a little bit some techniques, how to motivate ourselves and be clearly focused on the benefit of studying Prabhupada's books in a systematic way. Kalakanta, I would like to hear from you, because I know you've written a lot of things, and clearly based on the principle, Prabhupada's books are the basis. You've also even written a few songs. I think those are also inspired by your Krishna consciousness, no doubt. Perhaps also one or two maybe directly from Prabhupada's books. So share a few thoughts on your creative activities and their basis in Prabhupada's books.
Thank you. May I first just ask Vaish Prabhu, how long does it take you to read those 41 pages?
Average of 1 hour and 4 minutes per day.
Thank you.
Sometimes a lot shorter, sometimes a lot longer. So that's the average mean.
Thank you. I was appreciating Bhakti Marg Maharaj's description of extracting art from Prabhupada's books. And there are many instances where Srila Prabhupada indicated this was a foundational purpose of his writing, to inspire and accommodate people in a variety of fields and disciplines of science and sociology, as well as the arts. So for me, I have a particular inclination towards writing poetry, and I took inspiration from Prabhupada's Guitar Gan, which he wrote sometime in his earlier life and published in 1973 through BBT. This was a Bengali rendition of Bhagavad-Gita in poetry, in rhyme and verse. Our Vedic texts are all in meter, or most of them, and adding the rhyme gives it a sense of formality and structure. So I decided to try to do the same in English with the Gita about 20 years ago, and founded a wonderful meditation on each and every verse that Prabhupada translated. So I continued with the first and second cantos, and then later with the 10th canto. And for me, it's a way of studying that suits my particular nature. I do it every morning for 45 minutes. And my friend Krishna Srila Prabhu in West Bengal and I are now translating Gita Gan into English for the first time. It's full of amazing nuances in the study of the Gita. For example, Prabhupada says, control your mind. He translates from the 6th chapter. Control your mind, make it your friend, or it will be like Hiranyakashipu. So things like this that are expressions of Prabhupada's ecstasies give me great joy. I feel each morning like I'm associating with my spiritual master. Now, I wanted to, in that regard, share about reading Prabhupada's books from a different angle from Vaisheshika Prabhu's very systematic approach, which I appreciate tremendously. But we were all book distributors, right? All back in the 70s. I first met Bhakti Marg Maharaj in about 75 or so, and he was out doing traveling Sankirtan in a van in Canada, and I was quite impressed. And I first met Vaisheshika Prabhu at the San Francisco airport around the same time, when he was stopping people saying, "Dear, excuse me, sir, all glories to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years together."
He used the same. He brought the same line to Denver. I think there's no borders on that line.
So, back in my traveling Sankirtan days, I traveled with two wonderful devotees, Mahabodhi Prabhu and Ganesham, later Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. And Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was a very meticulous scholar, a Princeton graduate, and he would rise early each morning and read Prabhupada's books with great regularity. Mahabodhi, on the other hand, was less scholarly inclined. And so he asked Srila Prabhupada one day when we were on a morning walk with him, Prabhupada, I'm not a very good reader. How should I read your books? And Prabhupada said, whenever you have any time, open any one of my books on any page and just read. He said, sugar tasted on any side is sweet. So for Mahabodhi's nature, that was Prabhupada's prescription. For those who are more organized, there are other ways and really more comprehensive ways according to our nature. But the point is that Prabhupada's books are the basis of our spiritual lives, however we may be able to approach them. And I really found dealing with young people that because of their different natures, the encouragement to just associate with Prabhupada through his books is the constant, in spite of their various abilities and inclinations.
Wonderful. Let me just pick up on that. You mentioned about young people there. I'm thinking of some of the obstacles that sometimes we face, and as we all know, reading in the world today, although I think sometimes they say Vice probably knows book sales, I think, are as high as they've ever been. At the same time, you look at stories online. I mean, I look at newspapers online. Sometimes their stories are getting shorter and shorter, and people don't have the time that they say in the past to read. You see a lot of young people, they do all their reading here, and you wonder if they're reading because a lot of time they're just, that's how they pick up on the world. They've got 800 friends and they spend about a quarter of a second with each one to see what's going on. So that's a bit of a challenge when we present someone, here's a 400, 500, 800 page book. So let's go Kalakanta first this time, because you're working so much with young people. Is that an obstacle, and how do you overcome that challenge and that obstacle?
We've addressed this challenge by structuring our preaching presentation as an academic curriculum. And we take the Bhagavatam, for example, and we condense it or select verses and purports to study over a specified period of time. So we do 2 cantos per semester, 3 trimesters really per year, like a college, winter, summer, and fall. And then we covered a specific curriculum so that they know if I stay for 3 months, I'll have at least an overview of these 2 cantos. And that way in 2 years, if they stay with the ashram program, they'll say, okay, I'll have at least become acquainted with the contents of the entire Bhagavatam, just through the morning classes. So this is not as comprehensive a study approach, but it is one that's appealing to especially those who are of college age. They relate to the idea of, okay, I'm going to finish a certain study period and a certain study goal in a specific time. So that's one strategy we have used effectively.
So especially with younger people who are inclined to want to understand spiritual knowledge or specifically understand Krishna conscious Prabhupada's teachings, by having an academic program that's going through systematically, that helps kind of get over that hurdle. Vaisheshika Prabhu, I'm sure with your direct book distribution to the public, you meet a lot of young people. I'm sure you regularly hear, oh man, I don't read anymore, or whoa, that book's too thick. Or how do you respond to the man or woman on the street who might raise that challenge?
It's important to set up times and places where people can come and sit comfortably in a safe environment, which means they feel like they resonate with the people. They're not going to be judged. And then just hear together. As the hearing from Prabhupada's books is as important as reading them. So I'll give you a couple examples. One extreme example, every year I go to India and I go to Govardhan. It's a sequestered area at the Bhakti-Vedanta ashram, so we can stay on track. And we read from Prabhupada's books 5 hours a day, and lots of young people come. And they'll just sit in the room, and some of them in the courtyard. So we have good speaker systems. That's also a must for hearing and chanting. You get high-end sound equipment and make sure you're not chintzy and like echoey equipment because you couldn't spend the extra few dollars. And then we are on a regimented schedule. Again, we hear for 5 hours a day. Again, this is extreme, but we find transformational experiences. That is, young people who have transformational experiences. They come and they listen in that environment. They get used to the culture. And one brahmachari, after we had a long hearing and chanting session from the 4th canto, he came out and he said to his spiritual master, who happened to be there also, he said, "What was I thinking?" Meaning, what was I thinking about coming to the material world? It's that profound of a transformation. And another example of how this works well is, recently, I went to Los Angeles and I just told Savas, how about if I just set up a little mandap on the lawn in front of the temple and a bunch of chairs and a sound system. And for a few days, I'll just read Prabhupada's books out loud. It was very well attended. And we just read. And at intervals, we'd stop and discuss. And lots of young people from the community came and they just listened and they felt good about it. And last little practical point is that one of the ways I find to be especially edifying in reading Prabhupada's books is to be near the whole library, have access to it. That's why we always keep a whole library in the temple room. And while we're reading, when we come to a point that's interesting or we find to be especially profound, which I guess is the same thing, we would say, where does that take us elsewhere in Prabhupada's books? And for instance, Prabhupada would quote from something, and then we'd pull that book out and look at that reference. And after an hour or so, we'd have 5 books out. After 2 hours, we'd have 10 books out. And it goes in a round discussion where people say, this leads to that, that leads to this. So it's not so linear, but it's more taking the theme or the thread rather. And one of my favorite purports in that regard is in the Adi Lila, chapter 1, where Krishna's Kaviraj quotes Tesham Satata Yuktanam, that's 10:10 in the Bhagavad-Gita. And then Prabhupada's purport, he says, devotees come together like professors, discussing their particular theories of science and so forth, and back and forth. And a phrase, not in that purport that Prabhupada uses elsewhere, is discuss thoroughly, threadbare. So I find those kinds, setting up those venues where young people or any people, young, old, even dogs, cats can come sometimes and listen. They'll just curl up and like, this is nice, because it creates like a really beautiful environment and everyone walks away feeling satisfied. I've never, ever seen anybody walk away from one of those where they felt agitated or something like that.
Wonderful. Bhakti Mark Swami, any thoughts on this challenge of people? Maybe let's not limit it to young people. I'm too busy. I don't have time to read. I don't read anything these days. I get all my information on video or something like that. Vice is highlighted some points in Kala Contest too. Do you have some thoughts, some insight on that question?
Well, one of the particular services that I offer to the society is to go to, I get invited to festivals, and there's an expectation to work with young people or anybody from whatever age bracket, come in and do a performance, pull it together. We'll give you an hour, hour and a half, and you got a week to work on it. So I come with my script, my music already done, and we coordinate a little bit beforehand. So it takes a bit of organization before you get on location. And so you work with a bunch of young people who come to volunteer. You're not quite sure who is going to be doing what, but you'll see that you start with the kirtan. I'm just talking about the methodology. Everyone sits in a circle. I get a chance to see everybody. I get a chance to check out their voice level. Are they staying on track? And we'll try to move this way, that way. Who's not able to go right to the left? And then I can say, okay, we have a problem there. They can't do the dance, or they can't do the martial arts piece. So, what was, again, with Prabhupada's basis, the foundation being his books, we're working with people a lot of times who are not reading. And once we've gone through the practices, and they can be very rigorous and fun, a lot of sweat comes out of it and a lot of memorization. But in the end, everyone's so happy, especially when you come on the stage and you do a bow and everyone applauds for you. It's like, it was so much worth it. And wow, this is Prabhupada's movement. And yeah, he's the author. He's the founder of this society. And he's got it all. He's making it all tick and work. And I've got all my new friends now. And it's like a magical world that you've gone through for the last, week or 10 days, and all on the basis of, Srila Prabhupada's books. So I'm just saying it's a technique that works. It's bringing people together of different backgrounds, and some people are able to do the technical. You got the techies, you got the extroverts that must be on the stage. And so you got all different kinds of people participating. And it just becomes like the spiritual world transformed. And again, the basis is the books.
So what I'm hearing you say, Maharaj, is from your own inspiration, that's from Prabhupada's books are the basis, and your propensity, your own creativity, that leads you into these dramatic performances. These people, they get young people oftentimes. They get the messages of Prabhupada's teachings, Prabhupada's books through the dramas, through the script themselves, but also through that association. Vaishesha, we talked about creating a safe environment. You're creating a safe and happy environment where people are experiencing Prabhupada's books coming to life, as well as the philosophy. And then this whole Sangha, as again, Vaish talked about, even the cats and dogs come by and they're happy. They're sitting and listening to and through that safe environment, that itself becomes an inspiration for them to go deeper. I think I'm hearing that from a theme I'm hearing from all three of you, that through your own experience and your faith in Prabhupada's books and how it's affected your life, you're creating safe environments for people to come in contact with Prabhupada's books, and creative environments according to what they need. Young people, married people. Vaish talked earlier about 5-year-olds. Maharaj is talking about, teens and young adults. Be creative to create an environment which inspires them, to see how you're inspired by these books, and how this can create a beautiful place for them to feel their own self-expression, and then that inspires them to go deeper. So it really is a beautiful circle here. I'm a little bit conscious of the time. We've got maybe about 8 minutes left or so. We want to try to keep to about an hour. I jotted down some things that I've heard about ways to help inspire people to read books. Maybe I can go back and read through these, and then if you can each add to this list, or if I didn't get it quite right, I don't have names here, but going back to the first thing I jotted down, Vaisheshika Prabhu, you talked about the need to inculcate with the young people this taste and appreciation of Prabhupada's books. And you said you even start that at 5 years old, which I thought was beautiful. Then also a couple of you commented about, even if you don't retain what you hear, just hear, because that in itself is purifying and beneficial. Because sometimes that doubt comes, oh, I don't remember anything. But no, it doesn't. Okay, don't worry about that. Just hear, that in itself is beneficial. Bhakti Mark Swami, I'm actually noted here that he was the one that said this. Read also about the author. I think that's really critically important. I find that's an important one for me. The more I know about Prabhupada, the more I'm inspired to hear what Prabhupada has to say. And the more I hear about how he applied it. So I read in the book certain things you should do. Then I read about Prabhupada's life, how he did it. It makes me want to go back and learn more about what he said we should do and how we should do it. Then Vice Prabhu, 1 hour a day, be a sage. Be a sage 1 hour a day. And also the idea of a page a day, small steps in the reading of Prabhupada's books. Don't look at the looking behind you, there's this big shelves of books. Someone might think, oh, this is not possible, but do it in a systematic way. Finding refuge here, this helping people understand there's real refuge here. The material world is a tough place. There's refuge here. Again, just repeating what I've heard from you all saying, that here's an opportunity. This is the way we associate with Srila Prabhupada. And go back to the opening comments that you made by Sheshika, which was wonderful. I came to the temple thinking I'm going to find the guru sitting there. I'm going to sit with him and hear what he has to say. And they said, no, he's in India, but his books are here, and how that affected you for the whole rest of your life. So devotees, be inspired, knowing this is the way to associate with Prabhupada. And then I like Kalakanta mentioned, anytime, any book. I like that a lot. Hopefully, I think many of us could find that. Anytime, any book. However, wherever you open it up is beneficial. And at the same time, you all talked about the need for more structured academic study. That's a tool to help people move forward. And then Vaish, the last thing I jotted down, having access to the whole library, right? Vaish likes to say one of your wonderful mantra shlokas, the more you show, the more you sell, if I got it right. So we have the same way, the more you have access to, the more we're going to study. So those are some of the things, and this idea of cross-referencing. So a few of the ideas that I gleaned from what you were saying about how do we inspire devotees to read more. So let's go around, and if we'll have a round robin once or twice and see some added thoughts. Vice, what are some other points you would give about inspiring devotees to read or helping devotees to overcome whatever obstacles they may have to reading Prabhupada's books?
Well, first of all, Nitima Prabhu, you're such a great moderator. How you collect so many of the best points and then so judiciously bring them back to us and introduce them. A couple of thoughts just that I think to cap off my whatever I've said so far. I had this realization that to do what Prabhupada did was it was Bhishma-esque, to be able to stay up all night, write books. Who's gonna do that? I mean, some devotees are prolific in their writings, but no one will equal Prabhupada in what he did and how he did it, and just the sheer poetry. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just want to jump in here because I've been realizing lately, going and reading Leela Amrita and different books about Prabhupada, it wasn't like Prabhupada just stayed up all night after having a peaceful, simple day at the beach, right? I mean, Prabhupada was dealing with huge challenges with people and with projects and meeting guests all day long. And then all the 20-year-olds fall into their beds exhausted. Then Prabhupada sits up and writes his purports. I mean, it's phenomenal.
And you've got to, as a Ji-bi-si, you've got a taste of that, what it's like. So And so my realization is,
I don't stay up at night writing books in a peaceful Krishna conscious frame of mind. That's
right. It was superhuman, totally transcendental. So my thought, it was a spontaneous thought I had some time ago. So hopefully it has some efficacy. But the the same type of energy that Prabhupada put into writing his books. At least I can try to follow in the footsteps, the way one would follow in the footsteps of Dhruva Maharaj eating leaves and so forth. I can't imitate that, but I can try to follow in the footsteps to put the same type of energy into reading them, because that's what he asked me to do. I also advocate for writing as well, because it helps to clarify one's thought process and assimilate the books. But specifically about all of Prabhupada's books, the canon that he left us, I think about, like, let me try to come up to that level of intensity as far as I can in my capacity. And then just the last point, which is a detail you said about, I mentioned 5-year-olds. Then it reminded me that a lot of women, and we have a lot of babies coming into our community here. It's apparently a good place to raise kids. And one of the practices that the women are doing is, when they know they're pregnant, then in the family, they make it a goal to read the whole Bhagavatam out loud. So the baby hears it for 9 months in the womb.
During their pregnancy.
While they're pregnant, they'll go for hours every day and read the whole thing. And when the babies come out, it's first thing they say, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And I'm not kidding you. It's true. We have film of it. So, not exactly on the birthday, but like
maybe not the first
weeks
day
afterwards, they're sitting there in a lotus position going like, Narayanam Namaskritya. And it works. So mothers are very motivated. At least, I know some parents, they want their child to be a pure devotee, and that's the way to do it.
Wonderful. Interesting that you mentioned earlier our canon of Prabhupada's books. And I'm thinking, at least two versions of the meaning of canon. One, that it's our philosophical foundation, the scriptural writings, but also canon in our war against Maya. It's a canon. Our Prabhupada's books are canons for us in those two different ways. Kalakantabhu, one or two additional tips you would give. We've just got a couple minutes left here to increase our reading of Prabhupada's books.
Well, one of the issues with reading, of course, is that there are so many ancillary books along with Prabhupada's books that devotees would love to read. So how do we balance the priorities? And of course, it's, as everyone has been saying, it's absolutely essential to associate with Srila Prabhupada daily through his books. That's a must. Beyond that, for my experience at least, I advocate reading Lilamrita as a top priority after Prabhupada's books. And in Gainesville, we read that aloud over lunch every day so that the devotees can assimilate Prabhupada's life gradually without having to take extra time for study. That has an amazing effect of increasing the appreciation of the devotees as they're reading the purports, especially in the first canto. Before there was an ISKCON, when Prabhupada had one casual disciple and virtually no money, he was writing. And then the same voice is coming out after all of the development of ISKCON. That consistency is incredible. The struggles he went through are incredible. All of these insights into Prabhupada's life increase the appreciation of the reader of Prabhupada's purports. So that's one extra tip I would stress.
Thank you. Thank you. As I think Vice said earlier, know the author, be inspired by the author as well. Beautiful. Bhakti Marg Swami, a last comment, suggestion, recommendation on how we can inspire ourselves and others to study Prabhupada's books.
I think almost everyone on the panel here was talking about retaining information and versus it coming in one ear and going out the other in this world of mass distraction. So I believe that there's time that's needed to really sit down, with the scenarios that Vaishnav was describing, sitting down and going through, meticulously reading and discussing. I think there's a need for that. And I also thought many times I'm sitting in the Bhagavatam class, hey, we should turn this into a play, or we should do a painting of this, we should go for the artistic expression, kind of breathe out what we just breathed in. And then you can retain it a lot better. For the young people, they're at a stage where they like to flaunt. So get them on the stage, but give them the background of the philosophical content. And it's been magical that, you know, like even for myself, I've done various versions of Bhagavad-Gita. It's just a dialogue between two people. How can you make it fun and exciting so that it's riveting and the audience will go, bravo, you know? So it takes a little bit of, let's say, a strain in the brain. It takes a little bit of, forethought, but Krishna will push through. After all, Krishna's the artistic person. He went to school for the training of 64 arts along with his brother. And I believe that's one thing that we can do for our young people who are definitely going to grow into adulthood and go into other areas. And like in my own experience, I've had, you know, people in their 40s now, you know, getting close to it. Hey, I was in one of your plays. And this is what I learned. And I'll never forget how this guy punched me in the stomach and I flew in this direction. All those little details. So these details are important, and especially when it comes to spiritual cultivation, internal development, as opposed to just the external stimulation that is so much a part of the pop culture today. We should be going pop inside.
Helping people connect with Prabhupada's books and the themes that we learn in Prabhupada's books through their own lives and their own creative expressions is such an important thing. And as you see, you know, people coming back 25 years later, oh, I remember that. And certainly that's an impact on their lives. Well, I'd love to continue the conversation. I hope we can do so again in the future. We are out of time for our discussion today, but I want to offer my gratitude and pranams again to these wonderful Vaishnavas, His Holiness Bhakti Marg Swami, His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu, His Grace Kalakanta Prabhu. Real joy speaking with you. And I pray that through your association, more and more devotees and non-devotees will be inspired to read Prabhupada's books through the days and through the years, and all of us will go more and more deep. And thanks for sharing of yourselves and your stories and your inspiration and your realizations so wonderfully. So thank you very much. Jai Prabhupada.
Jai
Shri Prabhupada.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Vaisheshika Prabhupada.
Vivo.